Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of Main Course Recipes with me, Uncle Ted. Today we're going to do something quite similar in basic concept to what was basically done in the last episode, where we're going to be taking part in the creation of a rather delicious pot-based recipe, and I've been doing that a lot recently, and I will try to sort of deviate a little bit more from the standard formula as of late, but this is a good one. This recipe I kind of thought up of as being particularly useful to people such as students and stuff like that, so hopefully people out there who have very little time or money on their hands will be able to find this one quite useful, particularly as well vegetarians, because this is also a vegetarian recipe, meaning that it's a reasonably healthy recipe as well. I'm not a vegetarian myself, but it should prove quite useful to people like that. Now, first off, of course, I'm going to show you guys the ingredients. As usual, we've got a couple of onions. These aren't going to be the centerpiece of every single recipe I ever make, but they are quite, universal and ambidextrous sort of ingredients. Then we've got 3 or 4 cloves of garlic, got ground cumin, curry powder, preferably quite hot one, a nice bit of ground masala, some ground turmeric, smoked paprika would be quite nice, and a bit of ground allspice. Then we've got a couple of tins of tin tomatoes, a tin of chana, and then 2 nice big tins of chickpeas. Then, of course, just because they were left over from the last recipe, I also saved some new potatoes, so I just diced them up, rinsed them in some cold water. That's a good thing about this recipe. It's quite sort of a sort of just a kind of whatever is in your fridge kind of recipe. So, I mean, the onion, garlic, the spices, the chickpea, the chana colour, and the tin tomatoes, they're kind of mainly the centerpiece. But if you have something like a little bit extra in your fridge, like some leftover potatoes, leftover peppers, then you can use that sort of stuff to really sort of add a little bit of extra edge to the curry that we're about to make. Now, first off, what we're going to do is we're not going to actually dice up the onions or garlic just yet. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to simmer a little bit of the seasonings in the pan with some oil, just so we can build up a little bit of a sort of a paste. First, put in about a couple of teaspoons worth, maybe a bit more, of allspice. Then I'd say probably about the same amount as of curry powder, maybe a bit more. Already starting to smell some nice aromas building around. Then turmeric, add a bit of colour in there. Like I said, a nice bit of smoked paprika is always appreciated in this recipe as well, as it adds just that extra edge of flavour and gives it another bit of a smoky sort of colour and taste and smell. So yeah, we add in a couple of teaspoons each of curry powder and allspice, then about 1.5 teaspoons of ground turmeric. Then with ground masala, quite a strong seasoning, so only need to put in about 1/2 teaspoon to 1 teaspoon. There you go. And with the oil as well, at first you just need to put it onto a very, very low heat, just to heat it up very, very slowly. And finally, turmeric, just about, we haven't got much here, so we'll just put in about 1 teaspoon. So there you go, put in a bit too much there actually. But now what we're going to do is we're just going to sort of stir around these seasonings into a sort of paste, and you can see we've got a lot of nice Eastern looking sort of flavours mixing around there. Just try and sort of mix them together into a sort of nice sort of paste. Whoa, the smell's just beautiful. So now you've got a bit more of a homogeneous sort of like looking colour. but at the same time it does look quite nice and it smells very aromatic, so that's going to be quite nice. I'm just going to open the door so we can just let some of the smells get out. Don't want to stink up the entire house. And now what we're going to do is we're just going to quickly, like last time, just quickly prepare the onions. I sort of peeled them just before I started filming, just to make sure I would be, you know, not overburdened with time. So again, like always, you cut off the furry end, don't cut off the root. Then you just cut them in half and just cut up to the root without cutting off the root or through the root, just so when you dice up the onion you can keep it intact a bit more than you would if you cut up the onion traditionally. I know I kind of detailed how to cook the onions in the last 2 episodes, but sometimes, you know, you forget. I'm not going to show you how to cut up onions, or like, you know, maybe I might show more often not me cutting the onions up, but I won't always like go through the exact details of it, because after like explaining it 2 or 3 times, you guys will probably get the gist of it. I mean, you know, I gather my viewers aren't idiots, so I gather, you know, you're all mature, you know, wise enough people to figure out how to cut an onion. I mean, it's not that hard, really, is it? But like I said, some people are still quite squeamish about it, so you never know. It's quite a big thing for some people to do, because they might not like the feel of it. They might like the idea that it hurts their eyes. You know, the juices and the vapours of cutting an onion really does sting some people's eyes, and some people can be quite reticent to doing it. So it's just basically this is kind of like the most efficient and quickest way really of doing it without using a food processor, I suppose. I don't really use a food processor really myself. I mean, it's quite sort of a very 90s and 80s sort of thing, but I don't know, it used to have its uses, but since then, you know, you just basically just use a knife. It's just as good, and so long as you know what you're doing, you don't really have to put too much effort in. So now we've cut up the onions, we're just going to bung them into the curry paste we've started up. We're going to turn the heat up just a small smidgen as well. Just double the heat probably that we've put it onto. And that is great stuff. So give me a moment, I'm just going to bung these onions into the curry powder, the curry sort of paste, my mistake. And basically the reason why I put the seasonings into the onion first before anything else is just to sort of get it mixing around, so we can have the flavours get together and sort of start, you know, just get them sort of mixing together, infuse the flavours a little bit, and hopefully bring them out in a bit of more force than you would if you just bunged the the seasonings and flavours just straight in. We're not going to put salt in straight away. We're going to put that when everything is in together. I do use salt in a fair bit of my main course recipes, but at the same time I do try to sort of cut back on it, because, you know, everyone's trying to be more health conscious these days and just, you know, cut back on things that are, you know, more traditionally unhealthy. So now we've put the diced up onions in there. We're just going to put the lid on the pot and just leave that to simmer at a very low heat for about 5-10 minutes. Probably more likely 5 minutes really. And then we're just going to prepare the garlic. Like I said, before I did this, I did have some potatoes left over from the last recipe video I did, so I just sort of diced them up and washed them in a sort of sieve. So, like again, I just peeled that garlic conventionally by doing it with my hands, but if you want to know, the way I do it is by just sort of snipping off the little end here, and usually what will happen is it will usually be fresh enough for you to then just lever with the knife and peel off the rest of the onion. I mean, even if you cut off that little nibbly bit at the end of the garlic, you can usually just peel off the rest of the skin without being too facetious, and it'll be quite easy really. So just try and show you that again. Hopefully the garlic will cooperate this time. So pen down, there you go. kind of like that. Just keep it pinned down. Don't try to sort of slice away the skin if you want to do it this way. And you just sort of peel it off like that. It's very easy, not too hard. Nice and good. Garlic is quite tricky to cut though, so do be careful with your fingers. Not because it's, you know, more painful to the eyes than say, oh, sorry, knocked over some stuff there. Not because it's more painful to the eyes like say onion is, but just because you know, garlic's of course a much smaller vegetable, so be very careful with how you do things with it. So again, show you that. Just leave it off the end. And nice and easy, it just makes it nice and easy to sort of then just peel it off. You know, and then you cut off a little bit of unwanted garlic at the end. And then, like I said last time, you just get the wider bit of the base of the knife, put your hand on the side, with your other hand on the hilt of the knife, and you just crush it. Like I said again, it's probably easier to use a actual garlic crusher, but I don't have one on me, so it's basically the next best thing really. It works just fine though really, so do that to the last clove, and then when you're done, just like you would with a normal herb, you just kind of just sort of dice it up like that, nice and easy. Just do that around one more time. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to bung in the garlic along with the potato, and we'll just get that simmering for a bit as well. So now the smells are really starting to get around the kitchen, so we are starting to get some really great aromas going around. I'm just bunging the potatoes now as well. Great stuff. And now we're going to take back the colander or sieve or whatever that we used for the potatoes, because we're going to need that for the colour chana and the chickpeas, because we're just going to quickly rinse them out as well. And when you put the potatoes and the garlic in, you just stir the whole thing around again, just leave it to simmer for about, I don't know, maybe probably about 10 minutes, 15 minutes at the absolute most, but don't let it burn of course. So basically of course now what we've got here is we've got some coloured chana, which is kind of like a sort of a weird kind of like eastern sort of pea. It's not something I usually use myself in cooking a lot, to be honest, but it's quite interesting. It's quite exotic compared to the normal household pea in Britain, so I'm quite interested in using it a bit more in some cooking like this. It's also nice because just, you know, adding this in as well as some chickpeas just adds a bit more variety to the recipe, and means that, you know, you don't just have the same thing in your curry that you usually would. Just adding in something different that you don't usually have just, you know, allows you to explore a bit more. Like, I mean, I pretty much almost never use coloured chana really, but it's just interesting to use a bit more of it more often than not when you haven't had it for a while, or if you never really have used it yourself. Like, I've only ever used it once or twice. I just thought it might be interesting really. So now I've drained that. They're very small, these coloured chana peas, as you can see here, about the size of a normal traditional pea you might find in the UK. Kind of got a similar shape to a chickpea as well. Roughly similar properties. I think chickpeas are more of a source for protein, as far as I'm aware. I'm not the biggest nutritional expert on the planet. I do know the properties of a fair few sort of cuisine specialities, but I'm not the absolute master on it. So when I have a slight gap in my knowledge, it should show. But if there's one thing I know how to do, it's how to use some ingredients. It's how to cook them. I might not be, you know, the encyclopedia of the properties of certain, you know, cuisines and kinds of foods, but I do know, roughly speaking, that, you know, things like colour chana and chickpeas are a good source of fibre and protein, and are just generally quite good for sort of bulk food as well. So if you're making something like this kind of pot of curry here, you're going to want to use something like this because it's really useful, it's really cheap, it's good for vegetarians and vegans as well, and it's just nice to bung in, not too hard to prepare. All you have to do usually really is just open a tin. That's pretty much it. So very nice, cheap and easy. I got these 2 tins of chickpeas for about 40p each. So what I'm going to do first is I'm just going to chuck in the colour chana first before I chuck in the chickpeas. Now they've had a bit of time to rinse off. Just stir that around. Just get them mixed in there with the potato and the onion and garlic. Like I said, you don't have to use potato in this, but it's just simply the fact that potato was like the one extra thing I had in my fridge. So, you know, might be worth it anyway. But like I said, I'm now going to get these 2 tins of chickpeas. I'm just going to get them, pour them into the colander, and what I want you to do is just quickly give them a short rinse with some cold water. Don't need to dilly-daddle too long like you would with some kidney beans or cannellini beans, where you do need to rinse out for a little bit more than, say, something like this. I mean, the water that chickpeas usually come in tins isn't usually as gloopy, of course, so don't need to be as vociferous and extreme with the rinsing of your chickpeas as you would with, say, something like cannellini beans or kidney beans. So just going to leave them to drain for a bit, and then from here on out it's pretty much just a breeze. You just open the other two tins we have, which of course have the tinned tomatoes in them. This is just to add an extra bit of moisture, a little bit of vitamin C to the mix, and just to add a bit more juice, so to speak. If you want to add, oh, fuck's sake, that didn't go into the bin. Sorry, pardon my French. If you want to add in a bit more of the seasonings, you can, but the amounts I set out earlier are probably the more optimal, really, if you want to make this for 3 to 5 servings, I'd say. 4 or 5, really, more likely, to be honest. But yeah, I'd say you don't really need to go too far above the amount of seasoning I set out earlier on in the recipe, because otherwise you might overdo it a bit. I'm going to probably add in a little bit more allspice and curry powder, and I'm definitely going to add in a small bit of salt after I've added in all the ingredients. So now, I'm just smelling this now, and it's got a great whiff of just Eastern smells and sort of recipes, and conjuring up visions of, you know, Central Asia and places like that, and lovely sort of curries and stuff like that. So this is going to be nice. So now I'm going to just show you, after about almost 20 minutes of cooking, after having originally put the onions and seasoning in, what this whole thing looks like. You can see it's now got a very nice sort of traditional sort of curryish flavour. Got a nice mixture of sort of dark sort of colours with some, you know, light beige and dark beige in there. So now we're just going to add in the tinned tomatoes, just to add in a bit of flavour. You don't have to add in tinned tomatoes, but I just fancy doing it myself just to add in a bit of extra depth. Instead, if you're not a big fan of tinned tomatoes, you might want to just add in some water or a small bit of stock, perhaps. Would work just as well. I just want to add in a bit something I'm familiar with, really. So tinned tomatoes for me was really kind of the optimal thing I was going to use. So I'm just going to add in a bit more allspice and curry powder, and then I'm also just going to add in some what do you call it, salt, and then I'm just going to leave this to simmer for about as long as I need it to, for really I'd say probably about 20 minutes to half an hour while we prepare the rice. So I'm just going to add in probably about, not too much salt really, probably again about like a teaspoon maybe, if that. Hang on. It's about that much, maybe slightly more. There you go. Maybe slightly less than that, but even still, just enough to get a bit of extra oomph into the whole thing. Really get some nice smells in here now. So I'm just going to add in a bit more sort of curry powder, a bit more allspice, and then I'm just going to show you guys how to prepare some rice for this. Okay. So now that we've got the curry cooking on the hob for a bit, we turn the heat up just slightly. Don't want to turn it up too high. At most, just really turn it to sort of like a medium heat, because this isn't a meat curry, so it's not going to be too strenuous with the cooking. So now what we're going to do is we're going to get a coffee cup and our rice. As you can see here, I'm using some nice where's the label? There we go. So I'm using some nice basmati rice. I'm more of a pilau rice person myself, but basmati rice is usually a lot easier to prepare. So basically what you're gonna get to do is, if you're making just like one sort of helping of rice, maybe just get like about half a cup of rice, just pour it in there. Maybe not as much that, but even still, about half a cup per person really, I'd say is probably more optimal amount. If you want to go slightly over, that's alright, but half a cup is really the sort of optimal amount. I've slightly gone over the optimal amount really there, but it's not the end of the world. So unfortunately I did spill a bit, so I'm going to have to clear that up, but again, not the end of the world. So what we're going to do now is we're going to get the rice, and I'm going to show you how to just quickly clean the rice. Basically you just get some cold water and you pour it up to about half a centimetre above, or half a centimetre to 2 centimetres above the rice. But what you do is then make sure your hands are clean before doing this, but you then sort of just stir it around quickly. Particularly this is more important with white rice, because white rice usually has a bit more starch into it. You basically just sort of whisk it around with your hand. With white rice, I'd usually recommend doing this about probably 6, 7, maybe 8 times. Brown rice, you only really need to do it like 2 or 3 times. It's not that strenuous really with brown rice. So you can see there now the water's gotten a bit cloudy. Basically you just take it, you drain it quickly. If you need a sieve, then by all means use one. And then just chuck the rice back in. Put some more cold water in there. And then again, just stir it around with your hand. Try and make sure you get as much of this cloudiness out of the rice as you possibly can. It's quite a healthy, sort of non sort of threatening way of doing rice. It's a bit more strenuous, I will admit, but it's certainly, it's probably a little bit more cost effective and healthier than using packaged microwavable rice, although I do like that method a lot myself, I'm not gonna lie. Sometimes I can be a bit lazy myself, so but this is just the more sort of traditional way, I guess, of using rice and making it. I mean, a lot of cultures do have their own ways of preparing rice. The Italians particularly use rice straight into you know, a nice risotto, and usually cook it in the in its own sort of you know, in its own substances, and with a bit of, you know, stock before making a nice risotto. And I love the way the Italians make risotto, but this is just a more conventional sort of I don't know if I'm going to say bland, but just straightforward way of preparing your rice. Very, very good way of doing it. Very nice and straightforward. A little bit more preparation than, say, you know, using microwavable rice or doing risotto rice, but at the same time this is just as good really. So it just depends on what you find more useful, I really suppose. Risotto rice, of course, is mainly centered on just making risotto rice, so it's, you know, it's not as ambidextrous and flexible as something like, say, basmati or pilau rice. So I'd say more often than not, when you're making a curry, if not always, go with something like this. So I've done this now 3 times. I'm just going to do it 3 or 4 more times, and then I'm basically just going to put it on to boil with about 2 more centimetres of water over the top of the rice, with a little bit of salt and a tiny bit of maybe another seasoning if I fancy. Then I'm just going to put it on to boil, not to high heat, but just to boil enough that the water is absorbed into the rice. When it looks like all the water is absorbed into the rice, then take it off the hob. If it's still not entirely cooked, you know, take a little teaspoon into the rice, eat a little bit. If it's still not entirely cooked, if it's still a bit hard, then add in a little bit of boiled water from your kettle. And by no means, and I mean this, by no means must you stir the rice. I've seen people do that several times. It makes it all horrible and gloopy and starchy. I won't show you the entirety of that because that is quite a lengthy process, but by all means do not stir your rice unless you're making, of course, something like, say, risotto or something. Just leave it to sort of absorb the water into the rice, and then from there you just basically add in a tiny bit of heated up or boiled water if it looks like it's going to go a bit dry or burnt. And that's pretty much it. I'll show you guys how it all turns out in a bit, but keep what I've said about the rice particularly in mind, because a lot of people do fuck up rice a lot of the time. Like I said, just wash it around a few times, then put about 2 centimeters of water over the rice, leave it to simmer to boiling point until the rice has absorbed the water. If it isn't completely cooked and it's still a bit hard when you taste a bit, then put in a bit of boiled water, and then just take it off the heat when it looks like all the water has been absorbed into the rice. Maybe serve it up with some peas inside the rice, that might be quite nice, and then just, of course, serve the curry on top when you've put the rice onto the plate. So that's pretty much it. I'll show you guys how it turns out in a second, so stick around.
And that is pretty much it. While the rice is cooking, I would suggest adding in a tiny pinch of salt along with something like, say, some smoked paprika and maybe a bit of cumin, ground cumin, just to give the rice a bit of colour, a little bit of extra pizzazz and smell. To serve, I would say just dish up the rice, then dollop a couple of ladles worth of the curry on top, and then serve it with a nice paratha. I just picked out a really nice little plain one from Sainsbury's, and wash it down with a nice bit of cold water and maybe a ginger ale or something like that. If you want to go alcoholic, then I'd say just a really light pale ale. It's a really simple recipe, this, very healthy, not too expensive. It's really good for people who don't eat meat and also don't have a lot of money, or are a bit strapped for time as well as cash, really. So it's quite an ambidextrous sort of recipe, very flexible, allows you to use up the kind of vegetables you have in your left over in your fridge, as well as like chana and chickpeas. So it's quite a good flexible recipe, really. It's quite good for students and people who are just a bit strapped for time and cash. So I hope you guys find this useful as well as exceptionally delicious. And until next time, have fun, enjoy your food, stay safe, and I'll see you guys in the kitchen in the next episode of Uncle Ted's Recipes.